Okay, we're live on YouTube. For the record, this is position number 27, State of Georgia versus Keandre Juwan Johnson. Mr. Johnson is charged in warrant number 2022 CW 52169 with committing the offense of aggravated assault. Mr. Johnson is charged in warrant number 2022 CW 52170 with committing the offense of murder. Mr. Johnson is finally charged in warrant number 2022 CW 52171 with committing the offense of aggravated assault. Mr. Johnson is here present. He's being represented by attorney Kirby Clements. The state is present, is being represented by Cheryl Freeman. Mr. Johnson, I just want to caution you that anything you say during this proceeding is not privileged, nor is it confidential. So please don't say anything you would not want the whole world to know. Do you understand that, sir? Okay. Ms. Freeman, you may swear in your witness and present your case.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, before we start, is this matter being recorded now? Or?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That when I say it's going live on YouTube, is being recorded.
All right. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Thank you. Detective, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear and affirm? You can unmute yourself. Do you swear and affirm? Do you swear and affirm that the testimony about to provide in the matter of State of Georgia versus Keandre Johnson will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please tell us your name and how you're employed.
Detective Andrea Rosas, employed with the Clayton Police Department.
How long have you worked at the Clayton County Police Department?
About 4.5 years.
And Detective, were you assigned to work on a case involving a shooting that allegedly occurred on April 22nd of 2022 around 3156 Mount Zion Road?
That's correct.
And is that location at an apartment complex?
It is.
Did the shooting happen at a certain apartment or a building there?
It happened in front of building 16.
Were you dispatched to the scene?
Yes.
Please tell us what you learned from your investigation.
Once Uniform Patrol requested for detectives to respond to the scene, I did observe upon arrival a black and color Chevy Suburban collided into two vehicles and was informed by Uniform Patrol that there had been a shooting involving the occupant of the Suburban. The driver received a apparent gunshot wound to the right side of his face or head area, and the second occupant was located in the adjacent apartment complex. He ran from the scene and called 911 from help from there.
Do you recall the driver of that Suburban? Was that Roderick Powers?
No, the driver of the Suburban it was Terrell Smith. That's the deceased victim.
Okay. And Roderick Powers was the other occupant of the Suburban?
That's correct.
Okay. Was the decedent pronounced dead on the scene?
Not on the scene. About 2 or 3 days later was when he was officially pronounced. The hospital did advise he was more than likely brain dead, but was given the family some time to determine what they were going to do as far as terminating, or they gave them a 24-hour time period.
And just so we're clear, the decedent, I believe you stated, or can you tell us where exactly he had a gunshot wound?
It was to the right side of his head near the ear area.
From the scene, detective, were you able to determine if the gunshot came from outside of the vehicle or inside?
Yes, the gunshots came from outside of the vehicle. Specifically, they were towards the passenger side.
The individual who was found in the adjacent building, was he seated in the passenger side of the Suburban?
Yes.
Did he sustain any injuries as a result of gunshot wounds?
Yes, he sustained a gunshot wound to his right hand, I believe, and a gunshot wound to the left inner part of his, the inner part of his left thigh.
Was he taken to the hospital for medical treatment?
He was.
Were you able to speak to that other individual who was in the Suburban?
Yes, I was.
What was he able to tell you that happened?
Initially, Roderick advised that he was accompanying Terrell to the apartment. He advised he did not get out of the vehicle, and only Terrell went inside. He said afterwards, when they were getting ready to leave, an individual was walking from the breezeway, and he asked Terrell if he knew that individual. They both looked out, and Terrell advised he was familiar with him. The other individual saw them and made a comment such as, "Can't be no way," and began shooting at them.
You stated that Roderick, that's what he first told you. Did he give you a different statement at a later time?
Yes, a follow-up interview was conducted with him, in which he advised initially he was nervous with police, and stated the reason they were at that specific apartment was because Keandre Johnson owed Terrell money, and Terrell was going to see Keandre about getting his money.
Was Roderick able to identify Keandre Johnson?
We attempted to conduct a photo lineup with him. He advised he was not able to pick him out of the lineup, but stated he knew the person that lived at the apartment complex to be Keandre.
Was he able to tell you how he knew the person there was Keandre Johnson?
He advised through Terrell telling him they were going to go see Keandre.
Were there any other witnesses at the scene of the shooting?
The only other witness was a UPS driver who heard the gunshots, didn't see it, but he did hear the gunshots. And he saw when the vehicle collided into the other ones.
Were you able to determine if there were any surveillance videos to show the shooting?
No, there are no surveillance videos in that complex.
Detective, was Keandre Johnson on the scene when you got there?
He was not.
Have you since been able to speak to Mr. Johnson?
No, I didn't get the opportunity to speak to Mr. Johnson.
Okay. Did Mr. Powers indicate, or were you able to determine if they returned any fire, if they shot at anyone from inside the Suburban?
Yes, it did appear that they did shoot from out the vehicle. A firearm was located in the vehicle. We did locate or observed damages to the apartment complex from the gunshots.
Were you able to locate a firearm that Mr. Keandre Johnson allegedly used?
No.
When you got the statement from Mr. Powers, did he indicate whether or not Keandre Johnson was inside of a vehicle when he shot at them?
No, he advised he was out on foot.
Did all of this take place in Clayton County?
It did.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mr. Clements.
Yes, good morning, Detective. Is it Rosas, R-O-S-A-S?
Yes, Rosa.
All right, thank you. Let me start off. The surviving person, his name is what?
Roderick Powers.
Mr. Powers. Did Mr. Powers actually gave you 3 different statements? Isn't that correct?
He gave 2.
Well, let me ask you. In the warrant application, you indicated that he said that first that they went to the apartment complex to see a female, and a gray Nissan began circling the vehicle. Do you recall that?
Yes.
All right, and then he says an unknown male emerged from the hall, and that's the person that fired the shot. Correct?
That's correct.
All right, and now, so at that point in time, with that first version, he did not indicate a name or anything. Correct?
No.
And he didn't give a physical description at all. Correct?
He did give a physical description.
In his first statement at the hospital?
No, well, I didn't talk to him at the hospital. I talked to him after he was discharged.
Okay. So there was so who was it that spoke to him at the hospital the first time?
I believe Detective Joseph.
Okay. Now, when he was discharged from the hospital, you spoke to him at that point, correct?
Yes, once he was discharged.
Yeah, and when you spoke to him, he told you that he had gone to the apartment complex so that the decedent could go and meet with his girlfriend, correct?
Yes.
And that the decedent went inside his girlfriend's apartment for about 30 minutes, correct? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That's correct.
And what apartment was that?
1602.
And whose apartment? So he says that the deceased went into apartment 1602 and was inside of 1602 for 30 minutes?
Yes, that's what he stated.
All right. And then he also told you that some unknown males began circling around him in a gray Nissan Altima?
That's correct.
All right. And then where did the shooter come from in that version?
He advised it came from the breezeway.
All right. But again, he didn't give you a name. And is that correct?
That's correct. He didn't give a name.
And he said that the male who came from the breezeway said, "Man, ain't no way." Is that correct?
Something to that effect, yes.
All right. Now, you spoke to him again, I take it, when you showed him the photo lineup, correct?
Yes.
All right. And at the time that you gave him the photo lineup, he advised that they were actually there to visit the weed man, to go see the weed man, and they knew that Keandre lived in 1602. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So now, where was the weed man supposedly?
He did not advise or give a specific apartment. He just advised it was close to the front or entrance of the apartment, but he did not give the numerics.
All right. And in that third version, he went and he said that they went to visit the weed man, but they swung by Keandre's house because they knew Keandre lived there. Is that correct?
Yes, he advised that same day.
All right. And I'm sorry, when you say that same day, you're saying they saw the weed man earlier and then came back, or what do you mean by he advised the same day?
No, I'm saying he advised that part that second time that I interviewed him after he was shown the photo lineup.
Okay. So in total, just so we're clear, there were 3 interviews, 1 by Detective Johnson and 2 by you, correct?
Joseph, the
I mean,
first one,
Detective
yes. in the
Joseph, I'm
hospital.
sorry. Detective Joseph. All right. So now, when on this third one, he says that they went by because he said that this person owed that Keandre apparently owed the decedent $1,500. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now, during all of these exchanges, did you ever ask him why he gave you a different version? Why different versions have been given thus far?
Yes, he did advise that the initial interview after he was discharged, he was intimidated or nervous after the fact, and that's why he gave that first statement.
But he never produced any evidence to you that he'd been threatened by my client, Keandre Johnson, correct?
No.
All right, so this was he just told you that's how he felt?
Yes, that's why he gave us that first version.
All right. Did he explain where the males in the gray Nissan Altima came from?
No.
Did he tell you that there was in fact no gray Nissan Altima with a bunch of males in there?
He said he did see the gray Nissan. He was adamant about that part.
He was adamant that he did see it or did not see it?
That he did.
Okay. Now, with respect to the injuries that were sustained by the decedent, he was shot, you indicated in the head just behind the ear?
Yes.
All right.
In that area.
And I'm sorry?
Yes, in that area.
Now, with respect to the gunshots, I think you indicated that he said that the decedent fired shots after the first set of shots were fired. Is that correct?
That the decedent fired shots first?
No, after the shots had been fired at him.
Yes.
All right. Did he indicate whether there was a gun battle back and forth or just that the male in the breezeway fired shots and then the decedent started shooting back?
That's the male shot first and then Mr. Terrell shot back.
All right. Now, were you aware as to whether Mr. Terrell's wounds that he received to the head were instantaneously debilitating and fatal?
When our initial officers arrived, they did say he was unconscious, was breathing, but he was unresponsive.
All right. So did your witness indicate to you how it was that the decedent was able to shoot back after he'd been shot in the head?
No.
All right. Did you speak with the doctor to find out whether he was able to fire back after he'd been shot in the head?
No.
All right. Were there shell casings that were recovered inside of the vehicle?
Yes, there were shell casings recovered.
All right. And were all the shell casings of the same caliber?
I don't recall if they were the same caliber or not. I would have to go through my case file.
Well, I mean, I think that the witness told you that he did not have a weapon at the time. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out whether you determined that, well, it looks like there was more than one weapon being fired from inside of the car.
That's correct. He advised he didn't have one.
All right. And did the evidence that you found substantiate that claim that he didn't have a weapon or that there was more than one gun being shot from inside the car?
No, it was only one gun found in the shell casings. Like I said, I don't recall the exact caliber to give you an exact answer.
Did you find any shell casings outside of the vehicle?
Yes.
All right. And were they all the same caliber?
I don't recall that. I don't want to give a false answer.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. With regards to the shell casings, did they appear to be fired from that breezeway or were they consistent with being fired from the car?
They were found near the apartment 1602.
Right. But I guess the shooting happened near 1602. So I'm just trying to figure out whether the shell casings you found, did you conclude that they were being fired from someone shooting from the breezeway, as the witness said, or from someone shooting from the car?
I don't remember the exact location where the shell casings were found.
All right. Did you ever attempt to locate this weed man that they were talking about?
I didn't have any information, no names, no aliases, nothing to even begin.
Did you determine whether or not the deceased actually went into apartment 1602?
I was not able to determine that.
All right. Did the witness tell you that he made that up too, or no?
No,
So as we sit here right now, is it your testimony that the deceased went into 1602 or that he did not go into 1602 at all?
but based on Mr. Powers' testimonies, he said initially he did go into it, and then afterwards, when they were driving up, that's when they saw Mr. Keandre.
All right. So, and I'm a little unclear on that. So does that mean that Mr. Powers said that the deceased actually went into the apartment? That's all I want to know. Did he stand on he went into the apartment?
I'm looking in my notes. So in his second testimony, he did not go into the apartment.
Okay. Now, with respect to the identity of my client, you indicated that the witness was unable, that Mr. Powers was unable to pick Mr. Johnson out of a photographic lineup. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. So, and all he knew was that he was told that there was a man named Keandre that owed Mr. Terrell some money.
That's correct.
All right. And out of the three different versions that were told, two involving an unknown male, and the third one supposedly involving Keandre, how is it that your witness, Mr. Powers, was able to identify or say that with certainty that it was Keandre that was the one shooting the gun?
He advised he knew Keandre from Terrell. The Terrell was helping Keandre out with job because he had a business. So he knew Keandre through Terrell. And once we were on scene, the leasing office also provided us with the listed name for the apartment complex, and it was also for Mr. Keandre.
All right. So now, with respect to he knew Keandre, did he indicate that he had seen Keandre before, or he just knew the name Keandre from Mr. Terrell?
He advised he knew him from Mr. Terrell.
All right. But he was unable to pick him out of a photographic lineup?
Correct.
Did you ask him, how is it that you know someone, but you can't identify that person that you claim to know?
No, I don't believe I asked him that.
All right. So what other evidence do you have that indicates that Keandre Johnson was the person that was shooting at the two people that are the listed victims in the warrant?
I have the secondary victim's testimony. The name he provided did corroborate with the name provided by the leasing office for the male that lived at the apartment complex, and his initial description that he gave matched the description for Mr. Keandre.
All right. So, but the description that he gave you was just a general description, correct? I mean, he gave you, black male, light skinned, tall.
With tattoo on the face.
Right. And but in his prior statements to you all, he never described that person to you, correct? Light skinned, male, tall, tattoos on the face.
Yes, he gave that description initially.
At the very first interview with the first detective?
Yes.
So other than Mr. Powers' statements about what took place, you have no other independent evidence to suggest that Keandre Johnson was even present? Correct?
I have evidence, nothing. I have pending evidence that
What
I'm
is
waiting. Phone data rips.
Okay. Did he tell you that the deceased actually went there and attempted to shoot Mr. Johnson first?
No.
Do you know how many shots the deceased fired?
I know one for sure.
And that's the shell. And how many shell cases did you find inside of the car?
I would have to go through my case file for the exact number.
Hold on, I'm looking right here. It just says shell casings in what I have.
Okay, I apologize on that. I thought I printed out the CSI report. So the initial report doesn't state the exact number.
And you don't have any evidence that there was any, do you have any evidence that there was a dispute between these parties?
Based on what he stated, that the comment that ain't no way, and then in the follow-up interview when he stated they pulled up and Terrell asked Keandre what was going on with his money. So he advised there was a brief exchange of words.
All right, and that brief exchange was just what's going on with my money, and then my client is alleged to have started shooting right then?
Yes.
All right. Just a second. Do you have any other witnesses that were present besides the UPS driver that you described, or in addition to the UPS driver, who described the shooter as a black male with face tattoos?
No.
All right. Do you have any other evidence that, besides the outstanding cell phone data rips, that indicates that Keandre Johnson had a motive to shoot this man?
No.
All right. So there was no prior argument, no disputes. And with respect to the injuries of the deceased, did you? I don't know if I asked you this earlier. Do you have any information as to whether he would have been able to fire a shot after he was shot, or whether he would have had to only been able to shoot first?
No, I don't have any information on that.
All right. And as to the three stories that Mr. Powers gave, how were you able to determine that the one that he gave, the last one that he gave, is in fact the correct one?
I already had the name of Keandre Johnson before even speaking to Terrell. So when the detective that was presenting the photo lineup for me advised he could not pick out a person, but did advise that the person involved was Keandre, that corroborated the information provided from the leasing office.
All right, and just how did you have Keandre's name already?
From the leasing office, they provided us with the listed names for that specific apartment.
All right, so I guess I misunderstood. So you did not have anyone listing Keandre Johnson's name as a shooter until Mr. Powers told you that in the last interview, correct?
Correct.
All right, and in the prior interviews, he never listed Keandre Johnson as the shooter, correct?
Correct.
And did he ever indicate that the individuals from that gray Nissan Altima were shooters?
No.
All right. And you got no statement from Mr. Johnson, is that correct?
No.
All right. Did you speak to the person inside of apartment 1602?
There was nobody inside the apartment.
So at the time of the shooting, you all attempted to talk to somebody, I take it, at the apartment, and there was no one there?
No, there was nobody there.
All right. Did you all tell Mr. Powers that, hey, you told us somebody was there and there's nobody there?
He advised he knew Keandre lived there. He possibly fled and was hiding out.
Mm-hmm. And to your knowledge, Mr. Johnson turned himself in, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Just 1 second. Were you all able to make a determination as to whether Mr. Powers actually shot? That is, did you take his clothing to see if there was gunpowder residue or anything on it?
I don't believe the clothing was taken from the hospital. so I didn't obtain the clothing.
All right. And I think that might be my last question. Let me just look over here. Mhm. I know you said that there was no surveillance video, but did you determine whether any of the other residents had a Ring video camera that was present that would have recorded what took place?
None that would have recorded the actual shooting taking place.
But were there Ring videos that just recorded something?
I believe one only recorded the sound, but none recorded or were in the view to record the actual shooting.
Okay. Did the sound include hearing the words "ain't no way" or anything like that?
No, this was apartment across, so it wouldn't have captured a talking.
Understood.
From that distance.
And I take it didn't show any gray Nissan driving around?
No, it wouldn't have captured that, I believe.
All right. That's all the questions that I can think of right now, Your Honor. Let me just double check. Oh, I'm sorry. Did Mr. Powers give you a motive for Mr. Johnson?
For the shooting?
Yes.
He just advised that because he felt Mr. Johnson was possibly jealous of Mr. Terrell because he was a young male, was starting up a business, had money. So that's the only motive he could give.
And that was in your first interview of him, but his second interview with police, correct?
No, that would have been my second interview, the follow-up.
Okay, the follow-up interview, but he didn't give you that motive in your first interview, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and he didn't give the first detective that motive either, correct?
That's correct.
All right.
I was going to say, Mr. Clements, don't
That's
say
all.
that you have no more questions.
Yeah, no, I said I thought I was done, but I turned the page and I saw like 3 other boxes. Now I'm done. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, Ms. Freeman. Any
There's
follow-up?
no additional questions to state, right?
Okay. Let me ask.
Argument. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question for Detective Rojas. Based upon what I've listened to, if you lived at apartment 1602 and someone said Detective Rojas, under the facts that are present here, that Detective Rojas was involved in the shooting, what do you have to show that that would be false? Do you understand my question?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so I hear that Mr. Terrell or Mr. Johnson was the person that is alleged to have done the shooting. And I understand there's more investigation to take place, but I'm keeping it in the back of my mind. I haven't made up my mind, but it seems as though the evidence, as I heard it, as it came out, is that these two individuals, Mr. Terrell and Mr. Powers, went over to this location, and there was a desire to meet with Mr. Johnson, presumably about money. There were several different statements that were made, but I was just trying to listen to evidence independent of that helps to point to the likelihood that Mr. Johnson may have committed this. And this will be for Ms. Freeman to argue, but that was the basis of that question. And so you don't have to answer that, but Ms. Freeman, go ahead. Or are you gonna just waive opening and?
What state waives opening?
Okay, Mr. Clements, I'm ready to hear from you.
Your Honor, I would urge the court to find that there is no probable cause. Obviously, in determining probable cause, the court can consider the credibility and certainly the totality of circumstances of the evidence. And what we have here is a witness who is given three different versions. One, that there was, that they went over there to see some female, and then another one that they went over there to see the decedent's girlfriend, and that he went into the apartment and there are these males driving around in this Nissan Altima, and then there's a shooting. And then finally, he says, well, I don't know Terrell. I mean, I don't know Keandre, but I know Keandre through this guy, but I can't pick him out. And he's the shooter. The story just doesn't make sense. I mean, at a certain level, you just have to go, just because you put out facts to say someone did something, the court is certainly required to take it, do a little bit more introspection and examination of the record. And here, the record is the one witness says three different stories. He's given three different reasons for being there. There's no motive other than jealousy, apparently, without indication that they knew that my client was even aware of anything. We have the decedent being shot in the head and yet somehow managing to shoot back, which in and of itself doesn't make any sense. He was declared brain dead, or they indicated that he was on for 2 or 3 days while the family made the decision to pull life support. So the evidence that we have is insufficient, I would argue, to establish probable cause. Saying that it was Keandre because the victim said that we're going to go see Keandre and he's got tattoos and the like, that's fine. But at the end of the day, he's also given 2 other versions. So we have to evaluate all of that. And that's why I asked the detective, what other evidence did she have that indicated that it was my client and what took place? And there is none. So I would just say that for the purposes of probable cause, they have failed on identity of my client. There is, in fact, no identification. All they have is that he lives at that apartment, which, again, is insufficient. And I would also add that the version itself that was given likewise doesn't make sense. The decedent is shot in the head. People who get shot in the head and die from that gunshot aren't really shooting back. You either shot in the head and die, or rendered unconscious and brain dead, or not. But the state has not even provided a reasonable explanation to explain that process. And I would just say that those are the matters at this stage of the process that I think the state needs to solidify somewhat to justify my client's continued detention, because right now there is insufficient probable cause to show that he was involved.
Ms. Freeman, before we get to you, I have a question for Mr. Clements. I understand your argument as it relates to the deceased or decedent being shot in the head, but there was also another person in the vehicle that was shot twice. Isn't it probable or possible that the person that was the passenger who was shot in the hand and in the thigh, that was the first person shot, and then the Mr. Terrell returned fire and then he was shot? Isn't that just as likely as your theory?
Well, it may be likely, but that's not the evidence that the detective testified to. At this stage, he said he shot, and they didn't really give a chronology. So I'm just going on what the record is when he was shot.
I understand that. But
and yes,
hold on. If under your theory, at some point in time, the passenger is shot in the thigh and shot in the hand, but that didn't occur first, that occurred second. First, the decedent is shot in the head. And if it's coming from, what direction, and I agree with you, the testimony is kind of unclear as to some of this stuff, but I believe it's within the realm of possibility for that to have occurred.
I will accept that in the realm of possibility that could have occurred, and which is why I wasn't hinging my entire argument on that fact. I mean, as a practical matter, they haven't even established that my client wasn't even, if my client was in fact a shooter, he wasn't shooting in defense of himself, because he's given 2-3 different reasons for showing up at this place. 1, to visit some unknown female. 2, to visit a girlfriend, and then 3, they were going to see the weed man, but instead decided to swing by my client's house to ask about $1,500. I mean, as a practical matter, it seems more like they came by armed with a weapon. There was no weed man at all, because the detective says there is no weed man. They got no name, no description, nothing. That this is all a ruse, and they were trying to kill my client. Any one of those things is certainly out there as in the realm of possibilities. And that's why I say that the probable cause is lacking, because as we have it right now, we've got a story that just doesn't make sense. You're there to see an unknown female, a girlfriend, you're in the house, not in the house. Males are driving around in an Altima looking at you, or you there because, or you went to go get drugs from some other person, and you just happen to go, oh, let me swing by this guy's house to see about my $1,500, which again, while I have a gun, none of this makes any sense. I mean,
Judge, I'm gonna say at this point, Attorney Clements has definitely made his argument.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Freeman. And I'll say
that I think a lot of Attorney Clements' arguments are certainly for Superior Court, but at this stage and I know it is a low standard, but based on that low standard for probable cause and the testimony that Detective Rosas provided, I believe it is sufficient to bind all of the charges over to Superior Court, whether it's the scenario that Your Honor posed as far as how our decedent was shot or then and he fired, or how the other passenger how he was shot or he shot back. We don't know who shot first as far as whether it was Mr. Powers or Mr. Terrell. But again, this is probable cause and it is a low standard, and the information provided by the detective is sufficient. We do have our decedent who was shot in the head and he succumbed to those injuries. We have another occupant of the vehicle who was shot twice, one in the thigh area, one in the hand. His information provided that the person who they were going to see in that apartment was a Keandre Johnson. The detective testified that when she got the information from the apartments, that there was a Keandre Johnson who was on the lease for that apartment, and that's where the alleged incident occurred. So we believe, again, that the information provided at this stage by the detective is sufficient to bind the murder and the 2 counts of aggravated assault to Superior Court.
Okay. I've listened to the testimony and the arguments, and I'm gonna find that the evidence is sufficient to bind over these 3 charges based upon the following facts. For some reason, Mr. Powers and Mr. Terrell found themselves at apartment 1602, which belongs to Mr. Johnson. I find, even though Mr. Powers has given 3 statements, I find it credible for him to say, well, I heard the name, but I don't know the person. And so we're at the apartment. He's given several different statements, and that's going to be something that the state will have to deal with. Mr. Clements, if you want to put on a defense at trial, immunity or a complete defense, that'll be something that you will have to deal with. But I find that based upon what I heard, it's sufficient to bind this over on this low standard. So I'm going to bind over 2022 CW 52169, 170, and 171 to the Superior Court of Clayton County. Mr. Clements, you may be released. Detective Rojas, you may be released, and Mr. Johnson can go back.
Thank you very much,
Judge. And may Detective Rojas be excused?
Yes.
Thank you, Detective.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Have a good day.
And Judge, we are getting the officer ready now. We're getting a hold of the officer on Billingsley. If you can just give us a second. Thank you.
Okay.
And Judge, we are still live on YouTube.